So again, my name is Doran Schrantz. I have been doing community-based organizing for 16 years. I started this work in Chicago, but have spent the majority of my time in this field working for Isaiah here in Minnesota. But I'm incredibly passionate about community-based organizing, and the reason I'm so passionate about it is I truly believe that one of the things that makes change, and maybe the most essential piece of change making, is that people, meaning regular people, have the agency and capacity to be a part of change making. I think it's essential for our politics, for our democracy, and for all of our communities to be healthier, is for people themselves to be at the table in how change happens. So that's why I do the work that I do. A little bit more about Isaiah. Isaiah is a faith-based community organizing organization. We have about 100 member congregations in Minneapolis and St. Paul, so the Twin Cities region in Minnesota, but then also across the state. And we are a vehicle for congregations and people of faith to work collectively for racial and economic justice. And then Isaiah is part of a national network called PICO, or People Improving Communities Through Organizing, and PICO is a national organizing network of 55 affiliates like Isaiah across the country. I think we're in 19 states, PICO is, and all of those organizations work together at a local and state level for economic, racial, and social justice, but also work together at the federal level. PICO was critical part of the Children's Health Care Access Bill, or SCHIP, many years ago, part of the passing the Affordable Health Care Act. At a national level, comprehensive immigration reform, and then hopefully we will also be working together with the next administration on the first 100 days. So our whole mission for being is to create vehicles or power organizations like Isaiah, where people of faith and grassroots communities can be a part of decision making at all levels. So I want to introduce a little bit. I'm going to use this phrase, community organizing. You know, lots of people might have lots of different definitions for it, but this is our definition for it. Community organizing is a set of disciplines and strategic practices to build democratic and collective power. So community organizing has a theory of change. It's about building democratic power, so that means organizations are led and by their members, and people themselves have decision-making and governing power inside the organization, and that the reason for it being is so that we can have collective power to assure the conditions in which our communities can thrive. So in order to do that work, we have three major strategies for doing the work. So we spend a lot of time not on researching policy and communications, sometimes to our deficit. We spend a lot of time actually on grassroots leadership development. So most of Isaiah's resources are actually going to the training and building of the capacity of people to become leaders, and a lot of people call, nonprofits call the people that are involved in them volunteers, but the word that we use in our organizing is actually leaders. So people who are part of our organization and part of our member congregations are themselves leaders. So we do trainings, we create all kinds of opportunities for learning and leadership development. It is like a huge, it is probably the central mission of Isaiah's existence, is developing the capacity and leadership of our members and the people who are a part of it. So then we're also focused on building our organization. So without the organizations, there's really nothing for leaders to lead. So we are expanding membership, drawing more people in, and we believe that in order for people to have more and more power, they need powerful organizations that they own and control. And then our theory of change, so like the main, kind of organizing principle inside the organization says that power, or the way we define it, the ability to act, is essential for making change. So that the reason things are happening to us that make us unhealthy or create conditions of injustice A lot of that has to do with the dynamics of power in our society, in our economy, in our democracy. And so our main function of our organizing is that we are building more power and increasing ability to act to make the change that we need to make. So this is like a little picture that can show you a little bit about how these things work together. So grassroots leadership development is essential for building democratic community organizations. People have to be developed to build these kind of organizations, and when we build these organizations and they grow, we have increasing power or ability to act. So, as I said before, we spend a lot of time talking about power, and we talk about power as the capacity to act. So you see, actually the picture you see there are a bunch of PICO leaders. I actually think that's from Kansas City, and it was people working on healthcare reform. So this picture looks a lot like pictures you'd see in Isaiah or in PICO, California, or in other community-based organizations. It's people participating collectively in the public arena. So I'll do this really quickly. We won't spend a lot of time here, but we also think about power in a particular way. So we often talk about the three faces of power. And I think especially as we start to think about how we're making change in the public arena or systems and policy change, it's important to be able to distinguish the different pieces and parts of how power moves and how decisions get made and how you can change political dynamics for change. So the first phase of power we call is immediate political gains. So a lot of times what we talk about when we talk about policy change or campaigns or political action, what we're really seeing is people operating in the first phase of power. So that is, you can have a campaign, which I'm going to talk about more, is our campaign to pass paid sick days in the city of St. Paul and the city of Minneapolis. So that is people talking to their city council members, like a rally in the streets. It's a lobby day at the state capitol, or if you're talking about more electoral arena, it's, we're working for a candidate. But those are about the short-term and immediate gains we're trying to make around a particular issue agenda or, an agenda or a campaign. But really, really important for long-term change, especially if we're talking about like big systemic change, we have to be spending years actually building infrastructure. So we call that the second phase of power. So a lot of what we're doing today, I would actually put in the second phase of power. We're building the capacity of people. We're connecting people and organizations. We're like building the kind of institutions that we need over the long term to hold and sustain change. We have, some people would put organizations like think tanks or policy and research, like building relationships in an agency so that there's more resilience and capacity. In our case, in our health department, to actually partner with community organizations on things like paid leave. We are building the organization is part of building infrastructure. And then the third phase of power, which I think is incredibly oftentimes neglected part of our work, is shifting the story or the narrative. So we think of narrative different than messaging. It's like, how are we changing the story about what it means to be healthy? Or how are we changing the story about race in our country? What are the underpinning narratives that actually keep the status quo or the dominant, kind of dominant things we see around us in place? Oftentimes we, media, sometimes the people who even agree with us, we're often underscoring kind of a dominant narrative that tells us what's important and what's not important, and who's not important. So shifting narrative is actually in any kind of issue work is really an important part of how we think about power. So when we, one of the main questions actually a lot of our own members and people in our work ask when we first start getting involved or thinking about making change is, how do you pick what you're going to work on? So we actually spend quite a bit of time being really clear and really strategic about what issues we decide to move. So we might, a lot of times we start with an issue around the question of what is it that people in our membership, from our vantage point, is what is it that people are experiencing that is something that is creating a struggle or pain or is something that's widely felt, and usually where that comes from is a process that's connected to our leadership development process is through listening. So one of the issues that moved into becoming an actual campaign and then produced an outcome very recently, in fact we just finished the campaign, was to pass paid sick days in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and then ultimately we are working towards passing paid sick days at the state level. So we began working on that issue because people in our congregations, people in our communities were experiencing a level, which a lot of people are experiencing, a level of kind of economic decline, less economic insecurity. It actually crossed class and race, so people may experience it at different levels based on their social location, but there was a common issue of lowering standards and benefits, lowering wages, and an increasing anxiety and stress in people's lives that was about, like, I have to have my job, but I also have to take care of my kids, and then I have my mother, so there was this thing about, do we have the time and space and economic security to care for our families and to put our families first, or is work something that is at the center of our life and it has no give to it? So that was something that was very widely and deeply felt across our organization. But the question becomes, once something is widely and deeply felt, so you could go around and talk to people about care or about better jobs, those things become our kind of overwhelming, and they're too big for us to be able to move a strategy around in the real and actual political arena where decisions are being made. So the next question becomes, what will be concretely different in people's lives that could be a concrete, measurable outcome that would move the needle and people could feel it if it changed? And then we also ask ourselves the question, what in the current given context of immediate political gain, so if you think about the first phase of power, what would be winnable? Another question we ask is, what would shift the narrative? So going back to that 3 phases of power, we want to have a bigger conversation in our political discourse, in our public life, about the role of work and the role of families, and who's benefiting and who's losing in the current system, and what is a policy change and a struggle towards that policy change that could shift narrative, and what will build our capacity. So if we think about those 5 things, you can start to land on or scope. I've been hanging out with researchers, so you can scope what would be something that we could work on together that would be a real policy, a real change that would thread that needle of accomplishing all those things. And as a result of that process, paid sick days in our state became something that felt that we landed on as a concrete thing, policy change that we could work on together that was deeply felt and widely experienced. It would be measurable. Like, we know there are 68,000 workers in the city of St. Paul, for example, that don't currently have access to paid sick days. We believed it was winnable. We had the votes on the city council. There was a mayor that is outgoing, the political analysis that we had that said this is something we actually think we could move at the city level. We felt absolutely it shifts narrative. Because having a conversation about paid leave gives us the opportunity to talk about families, talk about children, talk about workers, talk about who's impacted, talk about what struggles families are facing, and begin to basically create a choice in the public arena of, do we think that the economy or people's labor and the extraction of their labor is the most important priority for our politics or our society, or do we also think that people exist to love themselves and love their families and love their communities, and is that also a priority and a value that we have as a society? And build our capacity, yes, because the issue energized people, and it allowed us to build relationships with other organizations that we wanted to work on this together. We wanted to work with and have a relationship with, for example, worker justice organization like SATOOL, or a low-income individual membership organizing organization called Neighborhoods Organizing for Change. It allowed us to build an incredibly powerful relationship with sort of the dominant labor unions in our city, like the Labor Federation, AFSCME, the Service Employees International Union, allowed us to actually build a really powerful relationship with our local teachers union, who wanted to work on an issue like this to look like and sort of send a message that they are about more than the wages and benefits of teachers. So it was a really powerful issue for us to move forward for those reasons. Well, I kind of said this, but one way to kind of think even more simply about how to turn what we call a problem, which is a global generalized thing that you know you want and is good, but in and of itself hasn't been scoped to be something that you could strategically act on. So we think about what we're constantly doing to act strategically in the public arena and build power concretely is to move problems into issues. A problem is poverty. An issue is increasing SNAP benefits. A problem is, or earned income child tax credit. A problem can be worker injustice. An issue is passing paid sick days or passing paid family leave. Those are some concrete examples. The problem is mass incarceration. An issue is moratorium on school suspensions in elementary schools in all of our school districts. So once you decide that you know what the issue is you want to move, the way we think about it then is you have to construct what we call a campaign. So you can't just decide we want to pass paid sick days and have somebody go talk to city council members and be like, hey, you guys should pass paid sick days and here's all the reasons why you should do it, and then think they're going to do it, because they're not. So to create change and move it from like this is a thing we want to make happen to it actually happening, there is a process of constructing an architecture that allows you to move power in all of the three phases over time to create the political dynamic in which they pass the policy. So in strategic campaigns, for example, paid sick days, we first had to conduct a pretty in-depth, what we call power analysis. So a power analysis is us starting to figure out what's our theory of change about how this particular city council with this particular mayor, with these particular stakeholders will move from maybe being tepid support to actually passing the policy. So a power analysis process isn't like you sit in a room. And for us, because we're a membership organization, it actually involves the members themselves. So it's part of our grassroots leadership development when people actually do a power analysis. But the key to a power analysis is very simple. Who's for right now? Who's against? Who's for and against actually on the city council? But a really, really important question is why? Why is somebody for it or against it? Who do they listen to? What does their constituency say? What are the politics around each individual power player or decision maker that basically positions them to be either for or against, or a swing, like they might be in the mushy middle? So based on that power analysis, then we construct a strategy. So in paid sick days in St. Paul, we knew we had two people who were going to be champions. We knew that the mayor wanted to make it happen, but we knew that there were essentially three votes on the city council that we had to turn from squishy to strong, and that there was going to be one vote on the city council that was going to be forever against, so hopeless. And then we had basically two people that we knew that in order to create the dynamic in which this would move to a passed policy, we had to shore them up / change their minds. So we built a strategy that was organized around lifting up our champions, shoring up the chair, moving an inside game with the mayor's office, and then taking the three votes at the center of the city council and trying to figure out how could we change the political dynamics around in their ward that would move them to be supportive. And an example of that would be a new city council person who got elected last year, who was in a forum, because we knew we were going to move this issue, it actually went before the elections, we made paid sick days an issue as people were running for election. She committed to support paid sick days. She also ended up getting endorsed by the St. Paul Chamber of Commerce. So we knew going into it that she had a constituency that wanted her to support, and she also had a constituency that was going to want her not to support. But she was publicly on record, and part of the reason she won is she was saying, I'm the kind of person who can build a bridge between the business community and people in my ward. So we began a grassroots campaign in her ward, which involved phone calls, building support in her ward, organizing small businesses, actually a whole host of small businesses in her ward. We had a series of prayer breakfasts and roundtables with her. Isaiah organized some of those, but then we also had partners who were better messengers than us to move her, like the Main Street Alliance, which is an organization of small business owners. We had very public actions in her ward. Meanwhile, we had people whose support she needs over time around her political career, like the lobbyists at AFSCME, the lobbyists of the Small Independent Small Business Association. We worked with her on policy to try to get her to a yes. So we had what we call very simply inside game, which is people on the inside of the power dynamics or the palace politics inside City Hall working her, and then we had outside game, which is making sure that she felt that she had enough power and constituency in her ward that she could go the right way on paid sick days without too much cost. So, so then tactics, I actually just described a set of tactics. Tactics could be a town hall meeting with people from her ward. Tactics can be like a postcard campaign. Tactics can be a prayer breakfast with clergy and small business owners together, having a negotiation with her. But we built a theory of change and a strategy and then a host of tactics over the course of 14 months that moved this to the center of the agenda of the City Council and to passing it. So we actually passed the strongest paid sick days ordinance in the country about 3 weeks ago out of the City of St. Paul that everybody, but it was a unanimous vote. But if you looked at it from the outside, you might have thought, oh, look, the City Council voted a unanimous vote for paid sick days. Wow, they're great. And not see the 14 months of strategy, power building, coalition building, infrastructure building, tactics, theory that got us to that place. So other examples of these kinds of strategic campaigns, they can run at a very local level, like the St. Paul, or statewide. We've been part of raising the minimum wage. Last year, we were part of a large coalition that passed drug sentencing reform at the state level. We are actually also have a campaign to move the CF, the Consumer Protection Bureau, to do stricter payday lending laws. That's a PICO campaign that's being moved. But this kind of methodology can be used at multiple levels in small, medium and hard kinds of things to pass. But on some level, there's a set of conditions or sort of questions you ask to get yourself to a place to have a campaign and can move things are similar across all those different dynamics. Here's some pictures of people doing tactics. See, people canvassing, so they're getting postcards. This is actually on driver's licenses. This is a picture at the top there of people sitting in folding chairs. It looks really boring, but it wasn't boring at all. What they were actually doing was a candidates forum with a Republican and Democratic candidates around driver's licenses for immigrants in Wilmer, Minnesota, which is the swingiest district in our state. So, and then down below, that's a tactic. That was a march for comprehensive immigration reform at the bottom. So that was 80 organizations in Minnesota pulled off that march. So I always like to pull out this quote when we talk about strategic campaigns, power in the public arena. Frederick Douglass says it all so well and better than I ever could. But he says, those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate agitation are people who want crops without plowing the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the roar of its many waters. The struggle may be a moral one or it may be a physical one or both, but it must be a struggle. power concedes nothing without demand. It never did, and it never will. So everything that we want to do to make change is a struggle. And that struggle isn't random. That struggle is something that we actually construct and build, and we can do strategically, and we do as architects, essentially, to create the kinds of changes in the power arena and public arena that we want to make.